Today I'm going to tell you a story so raw and unforgiving, it still leaves a scar on anyone who hears it all the way through. Out on the red dust edge of the Texas Panhandle, where the wind never stops whispering and the sun burns truth into bone, two worlds collided in the worst possible way. A mother's cold calculation and a warrior's silent code. It began with one small, terrible act. A girl thrown from a moving wagon like trash, left bleeding in the dirt, while her own mother drove away without turning her head. One single moment, one heartbeat of abandonment. And from that heartbeat grew a reckoning no one, not the settlers, not the elders, not even the land itself, could stop. The sun had barely cleared the caprock when Tano led the paint horse down to the creek. The water ran thin here, clear over smooth stones, the same stretch where Cale's blood had soaked the earth 3 years before. He let the horse drink, squatting on his heels, eyes sweeping the bank out of habit more than need. Then the wind quit. No rustle in the cottonwoods, no hawk cry. The air went still as a held breath. Tano felt the change in his spine before his mind named it. He looked down. A single boot-print, square-toed heel worn American, pressed into the soft mud at the water's edge. Not old. The edges were sharp. The sun hadn't yet dried the rim. It sat exactly where the elders had drawn the invisible line after Kyle died. No one crosses back. Blood ground makes the ground speak. Tano stayed motionless. The horse lifted its head, water dripping from its muzzle, and snorted once softly. He did not move to quiet it. 3 years he had ridden past this place without stopping. 3 years the elders' words had held leave what is finished. Let the dead keep their silence. Yet here was a mark that refused to stay buried. He studied the print the way a man studies a snake track, without hurry, without fear, only the knowledge that poison waits if you step wrong. The boot had come from the south, from the old trade road, from white men's direction. His fingers hovered above the mud. Touching it would be crossing. Not far, just one step. But the line was there, drawn in memory and in the absence of Cale's voice. Cross it, and the elders would know. Not because someone saw, the land would tell. He thought of Cale's last ride, how the old man had come here alone, following a surveyor's promise, believing words on paper could hold against rifles. He never came back. They found him face down, 3 holes in his back. No tracks, but American boots. The elders said fighting paper with blood only brought more soldiers. Tano had listened. He had ridden away. He had ridden. Now the boot print stared up at him like an accusation. He exhaled once slow. The horse shifted, impatient. Tano rose, wiped his palms on his leggings, and looked north toward the hidden canyon where the people waited. Then south toward Redstone, where men like Harlan Creed still bought and sold what was never theirs. He could turn back, pretend the print was never there. The wind would blow dust over it by noon. The elders would never ask, or he could follow. One print might lead to another, to answers, to blood that had never been answered for. Tano stood a long time. The sun climbed. Heat began to press against his shoulders. At last he crouched again. His fingertip brushed the edge of the print just enough to feel the damp gyve of the mud. No more. He straightened. The horse nickered low. Tano took the reins, swung up, and turned the paint south along the creek bank, following the faint line of disturbed grass the boot had left. Behind him, the wind started again, soft at first, then steady. It carried no sound but the rustle of leaves and the distant, patient cry of a hawk turning circles high above the place where the ground still remembered. And the print stayed exactly where it was open, uncovered, waiting for whatever came next. The boot prints led south along the creek bank, faint but stubborn, the grass still bent where the heel had pressed. Tano kept the paint horse at a slow walk, Rain's loose eyes fixed on the ground. The sun was climbing now, heat rising off the red clay in thin waves that made the air taste of dust and dry grass. He did not hurry. Hurry leaves tracks of its own. The prince veered east away from the water, toward the old trade road. Then they stopped. No, they dropped. Down into the dry wash that cut the plain like a scar. Tano reined in at the lip. Below in the cracked bed of pale clay, a girl lay curled on her side. White girl. Young. The elders had said it after Kale let the whites bury their own. Do not give them fresh graves to point at. He glanced up. A hawk turned high patient circles against the pale sky. No other movement. No wind now. Only the faint rasp of the girl's breathing and the creak of his saddle leather when he exhaled. Touching her would break the line. The hidden canyon waited north, watershade safety. No outsider had ever been carried there. The elder's word was clear: what bleeds on our ground stays on our ground. Bring her in, and the canyon would no longer be hidden. Bring her in, and he would carry more than her weight. He could ride away. The sun would finish what the wagon had started. Mara Kane would reach Redstone with her story-difficult daughter runaway gone. Harlan Creed would smile that thin smile and sign the papers. The land would change hands. Kyle's name would stay buried under lies, or he could dismount. Tano sat another long minute. The hawk cried once distant. He swung down boots sinking into the loose clay. The horse blew softly through its nostrils. Tano crossed the wash in 4 steps, knelt beside the girl. Up close, the blood smelled of iron and dust. Her eyelids fluttered, but did not open. He slid one arm under her shoulders and the other beneath her knees. She was lighter than she should have been, hollowed out by thirst and heat. He lifted her without strain, settled her across the saddle bow, and then mounted behind one arm, steadying her against his chest. The paint horse stood still, patient. Tano turned north toward the broken ridges where the canyon waited. He did not look back at the wagon tracks fading in the wind, nor at the boot prints he had followed. He felt the girl's shallow breaths against his shirt, felt the faint tremor in her frame. The hawk followed overhead shadow, sliding across the clay. Behind them, the dry wash lay empty again. But the ground had taken the shape of her body, now a shallow hollow that would not fill until the next rain. And the canyon, unseen from any trail, opened its narrow mouth to receive what should never have entered. The canyon walls closed in narrow and cool, the air thick with the scent of wet stone and cottonwood leaves. Sunlight slanted down in thin shafts from above, catching motes of dust that drifted like slow smoke. Tano eased the girl down onto the soft grass beside the stream. Her weight left his arms reluctantly, as though the canyon itself resisted taking her. He stepped back, giving her room, and knelt to scoop water into his cupped palms. Callie woke with a gasp, eyes-wide body jerking back against the rock. Her breath came ragged hands scrabbling for purchase in the dirt. She saw him, dark hair, tied back beadwork on the shirt, the quiet steadiness of a man who belonged here. Fear flashed across her face, raw and unhidden. She tried to push herself farther away, but the wall stopped her. Her torn dress caught on a root. She winced, shoulder stiff from the fall. Tano did not move closer. He held out the water palms open steady. No words. Only the small sound of droplets falling back into the stream. She stared at the water a long moment, lips cracked and pale. Then she leaned forward, drank from his hands in quick, desperate swallows. The cold made her teeth ache. She coughed once weakly. When she finished, he let his hands drop, wiped them on his leggings, and sat back on his heels. The canyon held the silence between them, deep, unbroken, heavy as wet wool. Callie wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Blood flaked off her cheek. Her voice came out hoarse, barely above the water's murmur. My mother, Mara Kane. She threw me off the wagon, said she was done with me. She's taking the land, my father's land, to Harlan Creed in Redstone. The names landed without echo. Tano's face did not change, but inside the quiet of him, something shifted slow, like a stone settling deeper into riverbed. Mara Kane, Harlan Creed. The same names that had drifted north on trader talk, tied to papers and promises and the creek where Cale had lain face down 3 years gone. The land she spoke of was the same stretch. If Creed took it clean, the story of Cale's death would be buried under new fences and new lies. No one would ask anymore. No one would remember. Callie watched him. Her breathing steadied, but the fear lingered in her eyes, fear of him, of the place of everything. She drew her knees up, wrapped her arms around them. If I die here, she said, voice cracking on the words, they'll say your people did it. Like they said about your father. The sentence hung. Tano looked at the stream. Water slid over stones, smooth and indifferent. He thought of Kyle's hand on his shoulder the last morning, firm, calloused, smelling of tobacco and cedar. The old man had spoken no grand words. Only some things you carry alone, so the rest don't have to. Tano had carried them. Until today. He could lift her now. Carry her back to the lip of the canyon. Set her down where the trail began. Ride away. The elders would never know. The canyon would stay clean. Kyle's blood would stay where it belonged, unmixed. Or he could stay. Tano rose slowly. He crossed to where she sat, crouched again close enough that she could see the old scar across his palm, a thin white line from the night he had cut it open beside Cale's body, swearing quiet to the dark that the debt would not sleep forever. He did not speak. He simply held the hand out palm up so she could see the mark. Callie looked at the scar, then at his face. Something passed behind her eyes, not trust, not yet, but the absence of flight. Tano nodded once small final. The canyon held its breath. Somewhere high above wind, moved through the cottonwoods, soft as a sigh. The stream kept its steady murmur, carrying nothing away. The canyon held the afternoon light like a secret cool and slanted shadows pooling under the cottonwoods. Water slid over stones with a low, constant murmur that never quite filled the silence. Callie sat with her back against the smooth rock wall knees, drawn up the cut on her cheek, now clean and pink where Tano had washed it with stream water. The blood was gone, but the skin pulled tight when she spoke. She stared at her hands, small scratch trembling just enough to notice. Tano sat a short distance away, cross-legged on the grass, facing the narrow mouth of the canyon. His back was straight, but his eyes were distant, fixed on the strip of sky visible between the walls. He had not spoken since bringing her here. The paint horse grazed quietly downstream tail, switching at flies. Callie drew a slow breath. The words came out cracked, deliberate. She pulled me off the wagon, grabbed my arm, pried my fingers loose one by one. Said she was done hauling me. Said I'd always made everything harder. Her voice broke on the last word, not loud, just a fracture. Her last words, I'm done with you. Then the wagon rolled. She didn't look back. The stream kept its rhythm. Tano did not turn. But something in the set of his shoulders changed, subtle like a bowstring drawn half an inch tighter. He remembered Cale's body dragged from the same creek line, face-down boots, missing pockets turned out. No papers, no answers. The elders had said leave it. Let the land keep its own score. Yet here sat the daughter of the woman who had ridden to Redstone with papers of her own papers that would erase the line where Cale fell. Callie reached into the hidden seam of her dress fingers, stiff. She drew out a folded scrap, thin, worn the ink faint but legible. A telegraph receipt. Amos Reed's name at the bottom. Confirmation of Thomas Boone's amendment. She held it out, not quite offering, just showing. If Mara reaches Redstone first, she said, Harlan Creed will forge what he needs. Sell the land quiet. And if I'm found dead out here? She let the sentence die. They'll say your people did it, same as before. Tano's gaze shifted to the paper, then back to the canyon mouth. The sun had moved. Light no longer touched the water. Shadows crept longer. He thought of the elders' faces when they spoke of Cale closed final. Bring a white girl deeper into this place, speak her name, carry her words, and the silence he had kept for 3 years would crack. The blood of his father would be laid bare before strangers. Not for justice, for survival. And survival had its own laws. He could end it now. Lift her again. Carry her to the edge where the trail began. Set her down with water in a blanket. Ride away. The canyon would close behind him. The elders would never know. Mara Kane would finish her story. Creed would sign. Cale would stay a name no one asked about anymore. Or he could stay. Listen. Ride with her. Let her words enter the world he had kept shut. Tano rose without sound. He crossed to the horse, took the reins, checked the cinch with slow, practiced hands. The leather creaked under his fingers. Callie watched him, breath held. He did not look at her at first. Then he turned, extended his hand, not to pull her up, but open, palm up the old scar, catching the last of the light. She stared at it. At him. The canyon waited. Callie placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cold. He closed his around them, firm, not gentle, and helped her stand. She swayed once, steadied herself against his arm. No words passed. Tano led the horse to her. She mounted awkwardly, shoulders stiff. He swung up behind one arm, steadying her waist. The paint horse moved forward at a walk through the narrow passage, out into the open, where the wind waited. Behind them, the canyon mouth narrowed again, shadows swallowing the stream's murmur. The ground held the shape of where they had sat, 2 shallow depressions in the grass, close, but not touching. And somewhere in the high rocks, a hawk folded its wings and dropped silent toward whatever moved below. The paint horse crested the low rise, 1/2 mile from Redstone, just as the sun hung straight overhead, heat shimmering off the flat grassland like water that would never fall. Tano drew rein. Below them, the town lay spread out, dusty Main Street, false front stores, the water tower leaning slightly, the church steeple sharp against the pale sky. Smoke rose thin from chimneys. A dog barked once far off, then quit. Callie sat in front of him, back straight, but shoulders tight. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing against her spine. The horse stood quiet, ears pricked toward the town. Tano lifted one hand, pointed north along the broken ridges, a faint trail that skirted behind Della Pike's boarding house. Then he pointed straight down the main road for her. No words, only the gesture slow and deliberate. Callie's mouth went dry again. She stared at the town the way a person stares at a loaded gun left on a table. Mara Kane's wagon had rolled in yesterday. She had seen the dust plume from the canyon mouth. By now the story was already spreading. Runaway daughter, difficult girl, vanished on the trail. Harlan Creed would be listening. Alden Gage would be waiting. If she walked down that street alone, she might reach Cal Tucker's telegraph key. She might not. Tano felt the small tremor in her frame. He had ridden close enough to Redstone before, always at night, always alone, watching Creed's office from the shadows. He knew the faces that turned too quick when an Apache appeared on the main street. 3 men dead 8 months ago, blamed on his people. Gage had never needed proof. One sighting of Tano beside a white girl and the old accusation would rise again, fresh and convenient. From here, the town looked ordinary horses tied at rails, a woman sweeping a porch, the faint ring of a blacksmith's hammer. But the dust plume they had seen earlier still hung low over the eastern road. Mara Kane was inside those buildings, now talking, smiling, that careful smile. The land papers would be moving from hand to hand. If Callie did not reach the telegraph before the story hardened, Thomas Boone's name would be erased, quiet, and Cale's death would stay just another frontier tale no one questioned. Tano shifted slightly in the saddle. The leather creaked. Callie felt the movement like a warning. She turned her head just enough to see his face, still composed, eyes fixed on the town. He had carried her this far. One more step together and he would be seen. One more step and Gage's deputies would have the excuse they had waited for. She swallowed. The words came out low, almost lost in the wind. If I don't come back in 2 hours, go. Tano did not answer. His gaze stayed on the street below. Callie waited another heartbeat, then slid down from the horse. Her boots hit the dry grass, dust puffed around her ankles. She steadied herself against the saddle horn's shoulder, throbbing, then straightened. She looked up at him once, long enough to see the scar on his palm catch the light again, then turned and started down the slope toward the main road. Tano watched her go. The paint horse blew softly through its nostrils. He did not move to follow. Instead, he reined left toward the north trail, the one that kept to the ridges and the shadows. The horse stepped, careful hooves muffled on the hard pack. Behind him, Callie walked on alone. The town opened before her porch shadows, long voices drifting faint, the smell of wood smoke and horse sweat and hot iron rising on the still air. Every step carried her deeper into the trap that had been waiting since the wagon rolled away. And from the north ridge, Tano watched until her figure grew small against the dust, until the street swallowed her. Then he turned the horse away, silent, the wind at his back, carrying nothing but the distant ring of that blacksmith's hammer, steady, unhurried like a clock counting down. The trading post smelled of oiled leather tobacco, and the faint metallic tang of gunpowder from the open boxes behind the counter. Cal Tucker stood at the telegraph key sleeves, rolled fingers tapping out the message Callie had written in careful block letters, confirmation of Thomas Boone's land amendment, filed 16 years back. Sole heir named clear. The key clicked sharp, then fell silent. Cal tore the receipt strip, slid it across the scarred pine. Callie folded it, small, tucked it into the hidden seam at her waist. Her fingers still shook from the ride in, but the tremor was quieter now. She turned to leave. Mara Kane stepped through the back door. Clean dress, hair-pinned, neat face composed in the practiced lines of a worried mother. Harlan Creed followed close behind, broad shoulders filling the frame. Pale eyes, steady beard trimmed sharp. The air in the room thickened. Cal Tucker's hand stilled on the counter. He looked once, then down at his ledger. Callie, Mara said, voice soft, almost tender. "Child, you're back. I've been so worried." The words landed like dust on dry skin. Callie met her mother's eyes. No flinch, no ducking away. The fear that had ridden with her down the main street burned off in one slow breath. What remained was cold, clear, like creek water after the thaw. Harlan Creed moved half a step, blocking the front door without seeming to. His voice came low, reasonable. "We should talk this through, Miss Boone. Private. No need for a scene." Callie's hand stayed at her waist. Fingers pressed over the folded receipt. The paper felt thin, fragile, the only thing left of her father's name on record. If she followed Creed now, into his office, into the back room, anywhere quiet, that paper would vanish. Or she would. The telegraph was sent, but receipts could be lost. Girls could disappear again. She looked at Cal Tucker. He had not moved. His eyes flicked to Creed, then back to the ledger, but his knuckles were white on the wood. Callie drew breath. Her voice carried not loud, but clear enough to reach the corners. I'm the legal heir to Thomas Boone's claim. The telegraph's gone to Cutter's Bluff. Amos Reed has it on record. You can't hide it anymore. Mara's face held the same soft concern, but a flicker crossed her eyes, calculation gone wrong just for a second. Creed's pleasant mask stayed in place, but the muscles along his jaw tightened. Cal Tucker cleared his throat once. The sound was small in the heavy room. Callie stepped toward the door. Creed did not move to stop her, not with his body. His eyes did the work, cold and final. They said this ends different now. No more quiet deals. No more waiting for the story to settle. From here, things would be done fast and done permanent. Callie passed him close enough to smell the bay rum on his beard, the faint sweat under it. She kept her eyes forward. The door swung open on dry hinges. Heat hit her face like a hand. The main street stretched out, porches, horses, people moving slow in the noon glare. No one looked her way. Not yet. She stepped down off the porch. Behind her, the door closed soft. No footsteps followed. But the silence that came after was different, thicker-edged, like the moment before a rifle's hammer falls. Callie walked north toward Della Pike's boarding house. The dust rose around her boots with each step. Somewhere behind in the trading post, Harlan Creed would be turning to Cal Tucker, voice low. The wheels were moving now. No stopping them. And the receipt in her dress felt suddenly heavier than the gun she did not carry. The door to Della Pike's boarding house gave under Callie's hand with a soft, dry creak. Dust swirled in behind her as she stepped through, breath still ragged from the walk up the street. The front room smelled of pine soap and coffee left too long on the stove-sharp, familiar grounding. Della stood behind the counter rag, in hand wiping the same spot over and over. She looked up once, quick assessing, then crossed the floor in 3 strides and pushed the door shut. The latch clicked like a hammer on an empty chamber. Frank Rye sat at the far table back to the wall, an old leather-bound journal open before him. The pages were yellowed ink, faded but steady. He had been reading the same entry for a long time, Eli Marsh's death site boot prints, where moccasin tracks should have been survey gear broken, deliberate, not scattered. His fingers rested on the open page, unmoving. When Callie entered, he did not look up at first. Only when she crossed the floorboards did he lift his eyes sharp still, though the lines around them had deepened in the years since he quit the bench. Callie stopped a few feet away. Her shoulder throbbed in time with her pulse. She leaned one hand on the table edge to steady herself. Della spoke first low, without turning from the door. Alden Gage is asking after a white girl with a cut face. Says Mara Kane told him her daughter ran off, difficult, headstrong. Words already moving. Callie exhaled through her nose. The receipt in her dress felt suddenly thin, like it could tear if she breathed too hard. Harlan Creed knew the telegraph had gone. He would not wait for Judge Harlan to ride in. He would move now, quiet, fast, the way he always had. Frank Rye closed the journal, slow thumb marking the place. He looked at Callie, then really looked. Not pity, not judgment. Just the long, patient measurement of a man who had seen too many papers signed and too many graves dug. You made it this far, he said. Voice gravel low. That's something. Callie straightened. The room was quiet except for the faint tick of the wall clock and Della's rag moving in slow circles. She felt the weight of the last hour settle heavier. Every step from the trading post had carried her farther from hiding closer to the open. Staying here meant Della's house would be watched. Gage would come. Creed would send men. If she left now, slipped out the back, she could keep Della clear. But Frank's journal would stay closed. The truth about Eli Marsh and the creek where Cale died would stay shut between leather covers. Frank opened the journal again, turned to a blank page near the back. His pen lay beside it, nib dry. He dipped it in the inkwell, slow, deliberate. "I'll take the complaint," he said. "Formal. Territorial record. But once I sign it..." He paused, pen hovering. "I ain't retired anymore." Callie watched the ink bead at the tip, black thick, waiting. She could walk away. Let the old judge keep his quiet. Let Della keep her house. Let the land slip through Creed's fingers the way it always had quiet legal final. Or she could stay. She nodded once, small final. Frank looked at her a long moment. Then he set the pen to paper. The scratch was loud in the still room. Name, date, description of the claim, the amendment, Eli Marsh, the boot prints, Kyle. He wrote without flourish, steady like a man signing his own sentence. Della stopped wiping. She crossed her arms, leaned against the counter. The clock ticked on. Frank finished the last line. He blew once on the ink-soft, careful, then set the pen down. The signature lay there, black and wet and done. No one spoke. Outside, a horse passed, slow down the street. Hooves on hardpack. The sound faded. Frank closed the journal, laid his hand flat on the cover. The room stayed quiet, but the quiet had changed thicker now, edged with something that could not be unsaid. And down the street, in the shade of Cal Tucker's porch, a shadow shifted, watching, waiting patient as the afternoon heat. The noon sun hammered the main street of Redstone, turning dust to white heat underfoot. Callie walked north toward Della Pike's boarding house, boots scuffing, slow, deliberate. Her shoulder ached with each step, but the pain was distant now, something to carry, not something to stop for. The receipt stayed pressed against her ribs, folded tight, the only piece of Thomas Boone left that still had ink on it. Mara Kane stepped out from the alley between the general store and the barber's shop. She moved, calm dress, neat face, set in the same lines Callie had learned to read years ago, practical, already decided. No surprise, no warmth. Just the quiet certainty of a woman who had measured the angles and found them sufficient. People on the porches paused. A man with a broom stopped sweeping. A woman in a bonnet looked up from her basket. No one spoke. No one moved closer. The street held its breath. Mara stopped 3 paces away. The wind carried the smell of hot wood and horse sweat between them. "You look tired," Mara said, voice flat without edge or comfort. Callie met her eyes. No ducking, no plea. The anger that had burned hot in the trading post had cooled to something colder, farther off, like a fire gone to coals. "I am," Callie said. "Been tired a long time." Mara studied her a moment. Then she spoke again, low enough that only Callie could hear. "Harlan Creed has the papers ready, forged clean. If you don't disappear quiet, Alden Gage will take you up for disturbing the peace. You know how it goes. Difficult girl, runaway, gone again." Callie's hand rested over the hidden seam. The receipt felt heavier than it should, thin paper carrying the weight of a dead man's name. She could feel the eyes on them now. Storekeep, the woman with the basket, the idlers under the awning. Watching, waiting. No one would step in. Not here. She could turn. Walk away silent. Keep breathing. Let Mara and Creed finish what they started. The land would change hands. Thomas Boone's name would fade under new fences. Cale's blood would stay just another story no one told anymore. Or she could speak. Callie drew breath. Her voice carried clear, not loud. Father left that land to me, not to you. The words hung. Mara's face did not change, but something flickered behind her eyes, quick gone. She stepped half a pace closer. You should have stayed in Cutter's Bluff, she said. Should have been easier. Callie looked at her mother. Really looked. The woman who had pried her fingers loose from the wagon board. Who had rolled away without a glance. The woman who had decided long ago that some things were better buried. Callie stepped past her. Not fast. Not slow. Just forward. Her shoulder brushed Mara's arm, light accidental. Mara did not reach out. Did not speak again. From the far end of the street, Alden Gage appeared on horseback. He rode easy, one hand resting on the butt of his revolver. The horse's hooves rang hollow on the hardpack. He did not hurry. He did not need to. Callie kept walking. The boarding house porch was still 2 blocks away. Dust rose around her boots with each step. Behind her, Mara stood motionless in the middle of the street. The watchers stayed on their porches silent. Gage reined in 20 yards off. His shadow fell long across the dust. Callie did not look back. She felt the weight of the pistol at his hip, the weight of the eyes on her back, the weight of the receipt against her ribs. Every step from here carried a price she could not pay twice. And the street stayed quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that waits for the first shot to break it. The house at the south end of Redstone sat low, and weathered porch boards creaking underfoot like old bones. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of cold coffee-old paper, and the faint must of books stacked against every wall. Callie stood at the cleared table hands, flat on the wood, to steady the tremor that had started in her fingers. Frank Rye sat across from her pen, moving slow across the final lines of the complaint. Names, dates, the creek boundary, Eli Marsh's broken survey gear, Kyle's unmarked grave. The ink dried black and final. Della pushed through the back door, Nate Pike behind her tall boy, maybe 18 hat in hand, eyes wide but steady. Della carried a small oilcloth packet. She set it down without a word, then crossed to the front window and twitched the curtain aside. The street outside lay quiet in the late afternoon slant. Frank finished the last signature. He blew once on the page, folded the sheets, neat sealed the envelope with a drop of wax from the candle stub. His hand lingered on the seal a moment long enough for the wax to harden. A knock came at the front door. Heavy, measured, 3 raps. Della froze. Callie's breath caught. Frank did not flinch. He rose slow joints, stiff, and walked to the door. He opened it halfway. Alden Gage stood on the threshold, hat in hand, revolver riding low on his hip. Dust clung to his boots. His eyes flicked past Frank to Callie, then to the table, then back. Frank Gage said, voice even, "Don't do this. It's a family matter. Let it lie." Frank held the door. He did not step aside. "The complaint's filed," he said. "Territorial record. Goes to Judge Harlan when he rides in. You got no call to touch it." Gage's gaze settled on the envelope in Frank's hand. The wax seal caught the last light red, unbroken. "Hand it over," Gage said. Not loud, not soft. Just fact. Frank looked at him a long moment. Then he turned slow and passed the envelope through the back door to Nate Pike. The boy took it without hesitation, slipped out the rear, and was gone. Boots quiet on the packed dirt behind the house. Gage stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under his weight. He closed the door behind him. The room went darker, the only sound the faint tick of the clock on the mantel, and Della's breathing from the kitchen doorway. Frank faced him again. No gun. No raised voice. Just the old judge standing square in his own house. "You crossed a line coming here," Frank said. Gage's eyes stayed on the empty table where the envelope had lain. "Some lines get crossed," he said. "Others get erased." Callie stood still. Her hand rested over the receipt in her dress, thin paper, Thomas Boone's name. Kyle's blood tied to the same ground. If Gage took the complaint now, the record would vanish. The creek would stay silent. The names would stay buried. Frank did not move. Gage did not reach. The silence stretched thick, dangerous like the moment before a storm breaks. Outside, hoofbeats faded fast down the back alley, Nate Pike riding hard for the trail that led east. The envelope was gone, carried toward Judge Harlan, toward whatever came next. Inside, Gage took one step forward. The floor creaked again. Frank's hand rested on the table edge, steady, unmoving. The clock ticked on, and the house held its breath, waiting for the first move that could not be taken back. 1 year had passed since the courtroom in Cal Tucker's trading post went quiet, and Judge Harlan's gavel fell. Spring had come to the Eastern Creek boundary grass, thick and green, along the water wildflowers. Nodding in the wind that carried the scent of wet earth and new cottonwood leaves. Callie knelt beside the last stretch of fence wire cutters in hand, twisting the barbs tight around the post. The sun was warm on her back, but the scar on her cheek still pulled when she turned her head too quick, a thin white line that caught the light and reminded her of the dry wash every morning. Across the creek on the north pasture, Tano's camp lay low, a small canvas lean-to smoke rising thin from a morning fire that had burned down to coals. He sat on a flat stone near the bank, knife in hand, carving a small mark into a cedar post, simple lines, not bold, not meant to claim. Just to remember. The blade moved slow, deliberate shaving curls of wood that fell into the grass like pale feathers. He did not look up when Callie paused her work. She did not call out. The creek ran between them, steady over smooth stones, carrying the same sound it had carried the day Cale died and the day Thomas Boone filed his claim. Harlan Creed sat in a territorial cell, now papers gone cold. Alden Gage wore no badge anymore, his revolver gathering dust on a shelf somewhere. Mara Kane had taken a stage east to St. Louis. The notation in her record followed her like a shadow no door would open to. The surveyors had come and gone, marking lines on maps that the elders had walked for generations. History was written down now, clean official filed away. But the land remembered its own way. Callie set the cutters down. Her hands were rougher than they had been a year ago, calloused from wire and post-hole digger nails short and cracked. She looked across the water. Tano's knife paused. He rose slow and carried the post to the bank. He set it upright in the soft earth, pressed it down with the heel of his hand. The mark faced north toward the ridges, where the people still lived, where the elders had listened to his quiet report and said nothing. Only nodded once. No celebration, no thanks. Just the weight of what had been carried back. Callie watched him. She could sell it all tomorrow, Fence Creek cabin, the 42 acres her father had broken his back for. Take the money ride out, leave the scar and the silence behind. Start somewhere the wind did not carry the smell of blood and cedar. Or she could stay. Wake every morning to the same water running over the same stones, every evening to the same view of the north pasture every day, reminded that some things cannot be buried deep enough. Tano stepped back from the post. He did not speak. He did not need to. The mark was there, small, permanent, a line cut in wood, the way his palm had been cut the night he knelt beside Cale's body and swore without words. Callie picked up the cutters again. She twisted the last barbs, secure the wires singing under tension. Tano turned back to his campfire coals, still glowing faint. The wind moved through the cottonwood soft, carrying the scent of smoke and grass. The creek kept running. Neither looked back, and the land held them both quiet, unyielding, remembering what paper could never hold. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.